The Chicago White Sox just completed one of the worst seasons in MLB history, and today we're going to try and rebuild them for 2025. We will address the team's free agent options, trade candidates, as well as potential prospect impacts. But first, it's important to set a goal for such an abysmal team. I think the only reasonable expectation for the White Sox is to figure out what the team's long term direction is, including big decisions on Garrett Crochet and Luis Robert, as well as sign rental players that will be turned into more prospects at the 2025 deadline. However, before we can look at any of those decisions, we need to pick a direction for the impending free agents potentially leaving the White Sox this offseason. The biggest name on the list is Yohan Moncada, who's being held in place by a club option, which the White Sox should decline. The option is for one additional year of Moncada's services at $25 million. The White Sox unwillingness to spend money aside, Moncada hasn't proved the worth of his contract extension signed prior to the 2020 MLB season for both parties and might be better to go their separate ways. Another player whose career hasn't quite panned out in the White Sox uniform is Max Stassi, and unfortunately it makes sense for the South Side to let the aging catcher walk in free agency. His club option is worth about $7.5 million next season, and considering we haven't seen Stassi play a game since 2022, there are better options for the current needs of this team. The White Sox should also look to decline John Brevia's option, whilst allowing Soroka, Clevenger, Cool, and Leone to walk in free agency. Internally, there are some exciting prospects that should be creeping towards the majors in 2025. We saw the first wave of those with Brooks Baldwin, Kai Bush, and Brian Ramos all making the majors at various points throughout the year, but 2025 should be even more exciting with all four of their top 100 prospects should be reaching or nearing MLB play by the end of the season. Those four include Noah Schultz, the number 15 prospect in baseball, another one of these fastball slider guys the White Sox love, Colson Montgomery, the number 28 prospect in baseball, a shortstop with some excellent pop, Hagen Smith, the 32nd overall prospect in baseball, and the 5th overall pick in the 2024 draft, and Edgar Cuero, the catching prospect that the Sox acquired from the Angels in exchange for Lucas Giolito at the 2023 trade deadline. When constructing the roster for 2025, it's important to leave room for each of these guys to work their way in and not hold any of them in the minors when they are ready. For free agents, I would look for guys who have the potential to be an above average player if everything goes right, whilst not being someone you have to commit to long term. The first of those players would be Nick Pivetta, making his way from the Boston Red Sox. Despite his ERA, Pivetta does do a lot of things very well. Pivetta is very good at getting strikeouts and limiting walks. He has a good fastball with decent off-speed offerings. The main downside to Pivetta's game is that he allows a lot of hard contact. However, getting him outside of Boston, which is generally hitter-friendly, into guaranteed rate field, which is generally more pitcher-friendly, should help him out significantly. And if you can get a hot stretch from Pivetta to start the year, it's definitely a guy you can look to move at the deadline for more prospects. Another full-timer I have the Sox signing is Adam Duvall of the Atlanta Braves. It's no secret Adam Duvall is having a pretty abysmal season for the Braves. The 575 OPS pretty much speaks for itself, but it's important to remember that Duvall is one season removed from having an 834 OPS and 20 homers. It's worth taking a flyer on the outfielder who has proven upside, so in the case that he shows it again, you can turn him into more prospects. And it's a fairly similar story for Kyle Farmer of the Minnesota Twins, who once again is in the midst of a pretty terrible year. However, if you can get the sort of production that he was able to get from 2021 to 2023, where he was a slightly below average hitter, he was able to bounce around the diamond, that becomes very valuable, especially to teams in need of a good versatile player come to the July deadline. The final player I have the White Sox grabbing has much less to do with the intent to turn this player into prospects and more so to do with the internal development of the players within the organization, and that is Austin Hedges. The White Sox have two young catchers who could use some mentorship at the catcher spot in Corey Lee and Edgar Cuero, and Austin Hedges offers that. We saw him take over the role for the Pirates in 2023, and as hard as it was to watch him play every day, being a backup catcher that essentially acts as a coach for a young catcher seems to be the best role for Austin Hedges, and a role the Sox could use until Cuero makes his debut. And the final question of the video has to do with what the White Sox should do with Robert and Crochet. The White Sox should look in the mirror and set themselves out with realistic expectations to when they can be a good team by, and whether they can tempt those players to stay with the team after their contract is set to expire. Crochet's case seems like it would be easier as he has already demanded a new contract, whether that be from the Sox or elsewhere at the trade deadline. The public announcement certainly hurt his value at the time, but given the right suitor, this offseason should be the ideal time to move on from the Southpaw. After all, this is the maximum Crochet's value will probably ever be at, and when you consider Garrett's contract expires after the 2026 season, it's hard not to be tempted by the move. The White Sox won't be good in the time frame of Garrett's contract, and with the White Sox top pitching prospects both being similar prototypes to Garrett, it has to be tempting to move on while the iron is hot. There are a number of suitors who I think could possibly give the Sox the package of prospects and contract Crochet requires to make the deal possible. The Orioles, if they lose out on Burns, the Cubs and Dodgers are a few teams that I think could swing the deal and make it worthwhile. As for Robert, there's actually room for the White Sox to hold on to the center fielder. Robert is struggling compared to even just a year prior, and that undoubtedly will create some question marks. However, he has stated multiple times his desire to stay in Chicago, and with 3 years of cheaper control over the superstar, there is reasonable ideology to think the Sox could turn around their fortunes in time to tempt Robert into staying on the South Side, especially if the teams continue to build up their prospect system the right way and can actually develop some of the team's incoming talent. At the very least, there is more value to get from Robert if he can produce at a higher level down the road. And that concludes the transactions for this team, leaving the starting nine with Corey Lee at catcher to begin the year, Austin Hedges backing him up, with Edgar Cuero presumably taking over one of those spots over the course of the year. At first base, we have Andrew Vaughn. Second base, we have Brooks Baldwin. Shortstop is Kyle Farmer. Third, we have Lenin Sosa with Nicky Lopez and Brian Ramos filling in where needed, with Benintendi, Robert, and Duvall manning the outfield, with Oscar Colas filling out the fourth outfield spot. The rotation to start the year would feature Nick Pivetta, Chris Flexen, Jonathan Cannon, Davis Martin, and Kai Bush. Would this team win games? No, not consistently, but the White Sox were never going to win a lot of games in 2025. You don't go from being one of the worst teams in baseball to vying for the playoffs, but this set of decisions gives them one of the best paths forward, with more MLB level talent on the surface level roster, with room to add to that prospect system later down the line, and allowing room for the prospects in the system to graduate to the majors. It's not pretty, but it's a reasonable offseason to expect from the South Side.